Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and representatives of diplomatic missions, distinguished attendees, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar, which is discussing the attacks on humanitarian workers inside Syria. For that event, I'm honored to welcome our distinguished speakers that I'm going to represent at the moment. I am Saad Baroud, the first secretary of the Syrian embassy in Qatar. And I will be introducing the speakers as they speak. We have diversity of speakers joining us from inside Syria, and joining us from Turkey, and joining us from the United States. We will be starting by hosting this first speaker, Ammar Selmo. He's a board member of the White Helmets. Ammar will be joining us today from Azaz in north of Syria. A little bit about Ammar. He graduated from University of Aleppo as an English literature. He also worked as an English teacher. Since 2012, he volunteered as an aid worker in different positions. He was elected at the local councils. At that time, he established different White Helmet centers inside Aleppo. Eventually, he became the head of all Aleppo White Helmet centers. Later on, he became the focal point of the White Helmets with Kemenex. Ammar is now elected member of the board of directors of the White Helmets. So I would like to welcome Ammar once more, and Ammar, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for making this and for the invitation. Thank you, Saad. Thank you for all the team, and nice to meet you all. So I will start the presentation, right?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. My presentation, I want to discuss two topics. The first topic is attacks on civilian and humanitarian workers in general, and their infrastructure, and the propaganda as a second topic. Syria regime from the beginning of the uprising used violence and disinformation as a tools to silence those who dare to oppose it or leave outside their control area. The regime also kidnapped and arrested a lot of doctors from the beginning. We all remember how he kidnapped and arrested, tortured them to death because they dared to provide services to civilian, those who dare to oppose the regime. And also Syrian regime law that does not allow any organization or any humanitarian worker organization or any doctor to help and provide help, considering him as a terrorist. This is become as a beginning to justify their killing in later stage. In any conflict, humanitarian worker could face the average danger of being caught in the line of fire. But in Syria, the situation is different because the humanitarian worker became a direct target, a systematic target of attacks. So Syrian regime whether attacks the humanitarian worker through direct targeting or attacking them while they're responding, attack their infrastructure, their hospital, their medical point. And also attacks them with double tap attacks. This is the most dangerous attacks that the regime and Russian also used as a tactic for to kill as much as possible, to kill the paramedics. In such attacks, the regime and Russian launched an airstrikes or attack targeting a spot where paramedic, first responder, and civilian are gathered to help the victims of initial attacks. If we return to our data, to our statistics, we will find that most of the volunteers we 296 volunteers of the white helmets have been killed. Most of them were killed in the double tab attack. So double tab attack represents a pattern of Syrian violation of international humanitarian law and represent the shock and awe policy of the Syrian regime. So also, second thing, there is no front line for Syrian regime and Russia. Just last year, they attacked a spot near Bab al-Hawa, which is near the border. So what a humanitarian worker is facing also is no front line for the regime. Everywhere is a front line. And this chart illustrates and show how many times during the last 3 years the Syrian regime attacked white helmets center and teams while they were responding. As 70 attacks have been conducted by the Syrian regime and Russian against the white helmet center and team. That resulted in 50 injuries and 11 deaths from the white helmets. This is number through the last 3 years. Also hospital, this is number just the white helmets responding. I'm showing just what the white helmets responded to. Also hospital was a target. The most dangerous place in Syria was hospital, and maybe Hassan will speak more about this. My colleague Hassan will speak more about this. So 54 hospitals have been attacked, or 54 attacks have been conducted on hospital during those 3 years. 140 have been injured and 35 have been killed by these attacks. So what the Russian use also is not only attacking hospital, but also manipulate the law. Like, for example, the deconfliction mechanism that hospital share their location and coordinates with the UN to be shared with the Russian in order not to be attacked, to avoid attacking them. Russian used this coordination and this location to attack the hospital. So were given to them by the UN. Schools also were targets, where 135 attacks have been conducted on schools during these last 3 years. 115 have been killed and 43 have been, 115 have been injured and 43 have been killed by attacking school. Camps also, lastly, camps, which is considered the safe haven for civilians who were displaced and flee their cities, have been attacked also, as 34 times have been by the Russian and regime have been attacked the camps. 146 have been injured and 50 have been killed. Second, propaganda, which is the most dangerous. So war not have been only on the ground, but it have been on our laptops, on our social media, on our computer, everywhere. So the regime demonized humanitarian worker, and humanitarian worker became victims of propaganda campaign by the regime. Why the regime and Russian, who are super-minded in propaganda and disinformation and misinformation, to distort the facts and endanger the people's lives, to justify their killing, after all, and to cast a long shadow of doubt over policy debate on Syria. So this information threatened to rewrite the history, to rewrite the history, and in doing so prevent justice and accountability in the future of the Syrian future, and to twist and hide the truth. So without the truth, the peaceful future for Syrian and its people will remain out of reach. So we are losing the future of Syria by this propaganda and this disinformation. A report was made by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, and the Syrian campaign has found that 28 individuals, outlets, organization, accounts spread disinformation about Syria. They use 51 keywords and hashtag in attacking humanitarian workers in Syria. 47,000 tweets and 1,000 Facebook posts have been made, against the Syrian in general, 21,000 of them against the white helmets to distort and discredit the credibility of the. So again, as I was saying, 21,000 of all the posts was against the white helmets. Almost 44% of these contents was against the white helmets to discredit the white helmets and plant a seed of doubt about the white helmets and the truth about the relative on Syria, the narrative on Syria. Possible solution, we see that to create, sorry. So to create an active protective law to protect the humanitarian worker, because the international humanitarian law did not protect the humanitarian worker, did not help to protect the humanitarian worker on the ground during the 11 years. Political leaders anywhere should better defend the general humanitarian principle enshrined in the international humanitarian law, because political leader inaction and the lack of action encourage the regime and Russian to repeat their crimes, to increase their crimes, and repeat it again and again in Ukraine also. All parties must reaffirm their respect for humanitarian principles, and concerted efforts should be made between all actors of human society in Syria and all over the world. Humanitarian organizations must develop ways to organize themselves regarding security issues and advocacy issues. Thank you a lot. I will stop here and hand the platform to my colleagues, Hussam.
Well, thank you very much, Ammar, for the information. And it's really shocking to see how much efforts are being done to shut down the sound of and the voice of the people. It was done by weapons, and it was also done by diplomatic efforts. At this moment, I would like to welcome again my colleague, Dr. Hussam al-Nahas. Dr. Hussam, he's a medical doctor. He's a researcher at the PHR, Physicians for Human Rights. Today, he's joining us from Maryland in the United States, which is very early in the morning. So thank you very much for taking the time. Hussam is a MENA researcher at the PHR. And before that, he worked in the front lines at the health centers and healthcare centers inside Syria. He coordinated the care, he coordinated the field assessment, and he also served as an emergency room physician and a field hospital in Aleppo. I think a lot of memories, a lot of information we will be hearing from you. Floor is yours, Hussam.
Thank you very much, Saad, and thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for having me. As you mentioned, yes, actually working in Syria had, like, I experienced a lot of memories, and I still have these memories from working inside Syria. And maybe to start with, these are the photos of 3 hospitals where I worked at different phases during 2012, 2013, and 2014 inside Aleppo. So you see here, and those who are from Aleppo can recognize probably these hospitals. So this is Dar al-Shifa from eastern part of Aleppo city. This is the Zarzur hospital, and this is Al-Quds hospital. I worked, as I mentioned, between 2012 and 2014 inside Syria before moving out. So PHR, and this is what I'm going to present mostly today, has been working on documenting attacks on healthcare inside Syria since the beginning of the Syrian uprising in 2011. And you can see here, this is a map of attacks on healthcare facilities. And actually, these are only the attacks that directly hit the medical facilities and had impact on the structure of the facilities. So based on the current number that we have, at least 601 attacks were targeted healthcare facilities inside Syria, and targeted at least 350 medical facilities. Around 300 of them are perpetrated by the Syrian government forces, and 2,044 were perpetrated by either the Syrian government or the Russian forces through the coordination mechanism between the two governments. 34 of these attacks were conducted by non-state armed groups, and 4 were conducted by the international coalition forces, and 21 were conducted by unknown forces. Now, the attacks on healthcare facilities, and you can see in the map, I will go back a little bit, but you can see in the map in 2011, 2012, the number of attacks on healthcare facilities was not that big. And this is because most of the country was controlled by the Syrian government. So attacking healthcare facilities was not the main strategy or the first strategy that the Syrian government used as part of their attempt to weaponize healthcare and criminalize providing healthcare to people who were pro-democracy, who went into streets calling for freedom, democracy, and social justice. So indeed, the Syrian government used detention and killing of healthcare providers as the first strategy. And you can see from the slide here, around 945 healthcare providers were killed between 2011 until 2022, and 93% of these death incidences were attributed to the Syrian government or the Russian ally, either by torture or direct attacks on healthcare facilities where healthcare providers are working, or other field executions. If we get deeper into the numbers, you see that around 278 of the 942 medical professionals who were killed are physicians. 54% of medical personnel were killed in aerial attacks or shelling, and 143 medical professionals were either kidnapped or detained and then subsequently killed. 69% of the killing took place between 2012 2015, and this is what I was talking about. Is the Syrian government used different strategies across the Syrian uprising to criminalize providing healthcare to those who were perceived as enemies to the state, and as Ammar mentioned, using or utilizing a counterterrorism law as a justification for the detention and extrajudicial killing. So at PHR last year, we received, or we conducted some in-depth analysis to data sets that we received from 2011, 2012, that document detention cases against healthcare providers. And as you can see here, and I will stress again that these data are from 2011, March 2011 until end of 2012. You see the number of healthcare providers who were detained during that period of time. And we have around 614 physicians, and we have around 400 health sciences students, and 183 volunteers from outside the medical field, and 113 nurses, 111 pharmacists, and so on. Of those that we received data about, we only have 15 who were officially detained, which means that those were referred to civilian prisons, while 60 were killed under detention. 1,100, around 1,100 were forcibly disappeared, and 470 were released. Now, we wanted to see whether there was a clear strategy, again, to criminalize providing healthcare and weaponizing healthcare during the conflict. So we did some correlation between different variables, and as you can see here in the graph on the right, those who were detained, healthcare providers who were detained because of their involvement in providing healthcare, were 91% less likely to be released compared to those who were detained because of their role, like political role. So let's say I'm a physician who was detained because of my work in providing healthcare and saving lives. I will be 91% less likely to be released compared to another physician who was detained because of participating in a demonstration or affiliation to an opposition party. So again, being affiliated to opposition was a crime, but then providing healthcare was even worse crime. So if you are a healthcare provider who was detained for providing healthcare, you are 400% more likely to be killed under detention, under torture, compared to a healthcare provider who is detained for political reason. And you are 550% less likely, or more likely, to be forcibly disappeared compared to a healthcare provider who is detained for political reasons. As you can see in the graph here, those who were detained spent in the present anything between 37 days in median up to more than 5 years under detention before being released. And if you recall, we talked about only a few number of those, like 15, who were officially detained, which means that those were detained in detention centers, security forces centers, and intelligence agencies, prisons. Those who died in median after 137 days of detention. Some of them stayed missing for more than 5 years before their relatives knew that they were killed under detention. So when you see the number 5.7 years here, it's not how long it took them to die under detention, but it's how long it took their families to see or to know the fate of their beloved ones. You see, it's well known that the detention system in Syria is a corrupt system. So it depends on how much resources, how much connections you have in the government, that might define whether you can be released from detention or not. So you see, for physicians compared to non-physicians, physicians were 143% more likely to be released, and 48% less likely to be killed under detention. And again, this is because the connections and the resources physicians have compared to non-physicians. And if we look at health sciences students, and I think, Ammar, you talked about this. We all remember the killing of the 3 students or volunteers in Aleppo City in June 2012, when 3 medical students were captured and detained while providing healthcare to injured demonstrator, were tortured to death, and then were burnt and sent back to their families. Basically, again, because they were captured while providing healthcare. So if we look into the bigger picture around this, we see that health sciences students, compared to others, or compared to physicians, were 42% less likely to be released and 38% more likely to be killed under detention, again, because of the lack of resources and connections for those individuals. Now, these are the numbers, but PHR also conducted interviews with healthcare providers who were detained and released, and they talked about how they were subjected to different type of torture during their detention, by beating them, humiliating them, subjecting them to stressful positions, even burns, electric shocks, sexual assaults. All these were documented as practices that security forces in Syria inflicted in detained healthcare providers. And honestly, I can reflect on this, and I can justify this, or not justify. I'm sorry. I can confirm this as a former detainee myself, where like guards who were like interrogating me were inviting each other to torture and to be the doctor. Like they were telling each other, can I be the doctor? Can I slap the doctor in the face? And it was basically because of my role as a physician. And they kept saying, you are treating terrorists, again, to using or utilizing the counterterrorism law in Syria that was issued on July. Again, when we are talking about attacks on healthcare providers, attacks on healthcare facilities, we are not only talking about the direct impact of these attacks on healthcare providers, the killing and the injuries of healthcare providers, but we are talking about like fragmenting the entire system, depriving people of their right to access healthcare. So in a case study that we conducted last year after an attack against Al-Atarab Hospital that took place on March 21st, 2021, which is Mother Day in Syria, we found out that a few months after the attack on the facility, there was a reduction of 78% in numbers of reproductive and neonatal care consultations, and there were 27% reduction in numbers of new normal deliveries for pregnant women, and that was not because we saw a mass displacement after the attack, but because people were afraid of going to the facility and seek healthcare, which put them in additional burden, where they had to travel for hundreds of kilometers to a different facility, a safer place to receive care, of course, with putting them in danger first to move in areas that can be attacked at any moment, but also adding a financial burden on them, where they have to spend a huge amount of money, which is 25-fold their daily wages or daily income, to move from like Al Atarib to Bab al Hawa Hospital, for example, to receive care. So it's not only the attacks on the healthcare and health infrastructure, healthcare providers is not only impacting the facilities themselves, but impacting, of course, the entire population that is benefiting from these services. On short term, where people are afraid, when people are afraid of going to these facilities. And as Ammar mentioned, when we were working in Aleppo, we used to say that living on the front line is way much safer than living in a hospital. And that, of course, have implications on the way we practice medicine in these facilities. We discharge patients as quick as possible from hospitals to minimize risk and minimize danger on them in case the facility got attacked. And then when you think about the 900 or the 601 attack on 350 facility, you can think about the impact on the health system and how services are fragmented, are clustered in safer areas, and people who are living near front lines, near M4, in Jisr in Ariha, have no access to any health facility and have to travel to other geographical areas to receive healthcare. So I'll stop here. And of course, these have a lot of legal implications, and supposedly the healthcare is protected under the different international laws, but from the numbers you see that this was not respected. And I will move it to my next colleague to talk more about the legality of attacks on healthcare.
Indeed, Hussam, thank you very much. It was shocking. We know all the facts, but hearing the facts once more and once more is always shocking. It seems to me, if I wanted to summarize what you've been saying in one word, it seems to me that you cannot be doing something more critical, more dangerous than being a doctor, than trying to help people, than trying to save lives. This seems to be unforgiven. This seems to be a mistake that you shouldn't take, which is opposite to any logic, any simple humanity, any simple sympathy of any person alive. So this is shocking. Thank you very much, Hussam. And I will be moving to our colleague, Zahra. Zahra joining us today from Gaziantep in Turkey. She's an international lawyer specialized in human rights law, refugee law. She's a board member at the SLDB, the Syria Legal Development Program. And she's also a consultant for different reports, including the SAMS report titled A Heavy Price to Pay, Attacks on Healthcare Systems in Syria. She worked since 2010 in conducting research studies and providing training for various organizations, including UNHCR, WRC, IRC, and Boston University NRC. Zahra, thank you for joining. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, everybody, and it's a real privilege to be on this panel with my colleagues here. What I want to do more is well, firstly, I'm basing this presentation on the SAMS report that you mentioned, A Heavy Price to Pay. So the data and the information that I'm going to utilize is in this report that came out a few months ago. And what I want to try and do is to contextualize the type of things that we've heard today with regards to not just the lack of attempt to not ensure that healthcare individuals and healthcare facilities are protected, but an actual targeting of these facilities and persons. So it's not just a dismissal of their protection by the conflicting parties, but it's also very much a targeting. But what I want to try and kind of dig into a little bit deeper is it does what we've seen today and what we've heard today and all the other kind of information that comes out with regards to attacks on, and I'm going to look specifically on healthcare facilities, so on hospitals and ambulances, etc. Does that actually in international law constitute a crime? We have different types of laws when it comes to when there's a war taking place and attacks on different entities do happen. At what point does it become a crime against humanity or a war crime? And that's what I want to kind of look at a little bit more in today, using the data and the information from this report. And I think this is particularly important because if we look at, so in the SAMS report, 674 incidents were looked at. And 92% of those incidents, the perpetrator was the government of Syria or the government of Russia. So two of those entities carried out 92% of the attacks on healthcare facilities in the data that we have in this report. And they are utilizing international legal arguments to justify these reports, to justify these. So it's particularly important to counter argue. It's important that we ensure that, that these attacks are well documented in a way that they could be used for accountability. We're seeing more and more a trend of attacks against healthcare facilities being looked at under different international criminal processes. So in the International Criminal Court, for example, we've seen in 2013 attacks on healthcare facilities in Ukraine being brought as part of the case study against the perpetrator. So in terms of accountability, it's really important that we are able to contextualize and understand these attacks in an international law perspective. But it's also important with regards to trying to prevent future, either in Syria or, like Ammar said, we see the same tactics being used in Ukraine with regards to the attacking of healthcare facilities and hospitals there. Nothing was done or said about it before, so the pattern continues. And I'm not going to reach any conclusion.
I think we are seeing your PowerPoint slides, but it's not moving. So maybe you can.
I haven't moved anything yet. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
It's okay. I'm still just introducing what I'm trying to do. But yeah, and none of these attacks, so there's 674 attacks being looked at. I'm not trying to reach any conclusion for any one of them with regards to whether this particular attack was a crime. But I wanted to show patterns of how to look at these crimes. It's not new that attacks on healthcare facilities have been taking place, and it's something that's also been recognized by international governments worldwide. So if we look at, for example, Germany in the last UPR made a statement to the government of Syria that it needs to stop indiscriminate attacks on things like hospitals. And Turkey specifically even used the word targeting health facilities. So, that emphasis on not just attacks that have also happened to affect health activities, but the Syrian government must stop targeting health facilities. So it's not something that's not unknown to the international community that these attacks are taking place. And what I'm going to try and do is answer a few questions that we look at when we try and see if an attack is against international law or not. First of all, the question of whether an attack has impacted a protected facility, a medical facility. So of course, medical facilities are protected under international law. They're not seen as part of the conflict. They're not seen as part of the entity that is part of the armed conflict, etc. So it's a protected facility. And of course, we can see from what's being said today, we can see from the information in the SAMS report, the impact has been intense and excessive. Just in the SAMS report and the ones documented by SAMS since 2014, 251 healthcare facilities has been impacted by attacks on healthcare facilities. And we've also got 181 vehicles, so ambulances, etc., that have been attacked. So in terms of the impact, that's very much something that's very easy to show. Of course, effect on human life as well is part of that impact. And from the data collected by SAMS, we've got 480 persons who've been killed through these attacks, and 1,268 persons who were injured. Of them, 56 children who were killed, and 137 children who were injured. So in terms of what impact and has these attacks on healthcare facilities had, clearly the impact is large and huge, and that's a very easy one to be able to show and to justify. Following questions is whether the alleged perpetrator, and here we're mostly talking about, because they conducted the majority of the attacks, the government of Syria or the government of Russia, knew that the attacked facility was protected. And it's an interesting one to look at, especially with what we saw as the UN humanitarian deconfliction process. So this process was created by the UN to share the GPS locations of healthcare facilities and targets with everybody who are involved in the conflict, to say, like, there's a hospital in this area, please do not attack this area because there's a hospital there that, the UN has clarified is a hospital, is working as providing healthcare facilities. So SAMS and other NGOs did share the GPS of hospitals from March 2018. I think 288 hospital facilities, the location of them was shared. Despite that, we see 27 direct attacks. We've also got a lot of attacks that happened that we didn't consider direct, but 27 direct attacks on facilities that were part of this list of, we are a hospital, the GPS is being shared, everybody knows that we are a hospital. And it affected 22 facilities, these 27 direct attacks. So we've got patterns here that show, yes, the alleged perpetrators knew that this facility was protected, because they absolutely cannot deny that they did not have that information. And we can see from this list, some of these hospitals are also attacked more than once. We've also got the question that needs to be answered as to whether the attack targeted the facility rather than something else in the area. So this is kind of something that's also brought about quite often is, did the alleged perpetrator, did the government of Syria know that, did the Syrian regime know that this was, did it meant to target it, or was it just kind of collateral damage? And from the information we have, and it's very clear from what Dr. Hussam Ammar was saying, that the target of healthcare personnel and facilities is a clear objective of a lot of these attacks, but it's also shown through the numbers and the data. So in terms of the attacks that were looked at, the majority of them were direct. So the actual hospital was targeted, as opposed to there was conflict in the area and the hospital was also damaged because of collateral damage. So that's 354 of the incidents that we looked at. Also, it's also important when we're looking at whether the same question, so whether the hospital was attacked directly. And this is a really, really important question. Was it just, okay, there was a conflict happening in that place and by accident? No, or was the regime trying to target these hospitals? When you dig deeper into the statistics and into the kind of information that we have here, if you look at, for example, the first hospital on this list, Al-Sahur Hospital, it was initially a Red Cross hospital, so it was very well known that this is a hospital. Everybody knew it was a hospital beforehand, and then eventually it went underground to try and protect its staff and its patients from what was going on with the conflict. And despite that, the direct attack on the hospital happened 19 times. So, trying to show that it was just part of collateral damage is very difficult when this very well-known hospital that even has to go underground to try and protect its staff is attacked 19 times by the government by the Syrian regime in this circumstance. It's important to look at what also Syria, the regime has said. Specifically, it's the most recent remarks on this has been done through what's called the Universal Periodic Review, where states kind of question Syria on what it's, like Germany and Turkey beforehand, on some of the things it's been doing, to see what this Syrian regime has answered. And what they've said, as Ammar was saying, is, of course, it's all false information. It's wrong that these attacks are happening. But when attacks have happened, what they say is that they are no longer, that these facilities are no longer used as medical units, but are used to contribute to military action and to achieve a military advantage, etc. And then they quote, you know, the relevant international law that then therefore allows them to directly attack these facilities, and also states that they shared this information of these hospitals with the United Nations and these medical facilities. We go back to, you know, the hospitals that had shared their GPS but were still attacked, and these were confirmed by the UN to be healthcare facilities and not you know, military bases, which has been the claim. And also the word terrorist bases is also often used in the discourse of the regime. So we've obviously got that to look at, but we've also got the fact that there's a plethora and a wealth of information from these facilities that show that they were offering medical care. So, you know, with disregarding the pictures and the videos that have come from these hospitals before and after attacks, and there's so much in the data. We've also got consultation, very detailed consultation records. You know, we've got, for example, Al Salam Hospital, total consultations in December. This is just an example. It was just under 8,000 consultations. And if we go and dig deeper, there's so much information of, you know, who was consulted and what their problem was medically, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea that those hospitals that were attacked by the regime were attacked because they were no longer being used as hospitals is very, 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 very easily counter-argued and very, very easily shown to not be true. And then the last question we often ask to see whether these attacks on hospitals could violate international law or not, because they're targeted, because etc., is whether the facility was warned by who was attacking beforehand. Even if an entity isn't, you know, a hospital, whatever it is, the attacking in international law, you have to give warning beforehand that you're going to attack, unless there's an imminent threat that, you know, they're about to attack you. So out of the 674 attacks that I looked at, and that was looked at in this report, the amount of warnings that were given by the regime or by any of the people who were attacking was a total of 0. Absolutely no incident was there a warning given before an attack took place, which is not allowed under international law. So that's kind of the last question that we tend to look at when we look at, you know, okay, were they, as they suggest, they are following international law when it comes to the way they carried out this law. I think, of course, what was said by Ammar and Dr. Hussam kind of really gets the nitty-gritty of what is taking place in terms of the actual effects. I mean, I'm talking very theoretically. I'm not talking about the actual effects on people and communities and healthcare facilities. I'm just trying to kind of take a broader perspective. Okay, does this actually mean, though, that a crime, when we're talking about a time of war, was committed? And I think we can see from the patterns that was shown in this report and is shown for all the information that, you know, people like Ammar have, that absolutely there have been violations that have taken place. What the regime has used to justify what they're doing is often inconsistent and absurd with regards to all the evidence that can be used against their arguments. So this is just kind of to try and contextualize a little bit more when in the future there are tools and mechanisms for accountability, that there is and there should be more attempt to document all the details of these attacks to ensure that they're able to be tried under the international legal framework. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Once again, the type of information we are hearing, despite the fact we know most of this information, but reiterating them is shocking. The evidence are biting. There's no doubt what's happening. It's just happening because it's a mistake, or it was done by any chance legally. There's obviously violation of the international human law. I have a couple of questions from the attendees, and I will take the liberty to direct questions to our panelists, if that's okay with you. So one of the questions is asking about whether these attacks on humanitarian workers affect the capacity of humanitarian action inside Syria. And maybe, Ammar, you would like to answer this question. How do you see these kind of attacks affecting your capacity, your ability to respond and to save lives? Over to you.
Yes, it affects our capacity because our center is not safe. The place we respond to is not safe. So as I mentioned, we lost 296 volunteers. Most of them were killed in attacks while they were responding to their duty or in centers. So it affects our capacity, destroying our center. Just last year, Russia used a new weapon, which is laser-guided weapon made by Russian called Crossbow. It attacks our center. When it attacks, this is when it attacks our center, it attacks the center on purpose. There is no random attacks in these attacks. So it affects our capacity and our responding and of saving souls.
Thank you very much, Ammar. But the technology normally in normal context should be serving humanity, but in the war context, development of technology is used against humanity. I have another question from the attendees. Maybe Dr. Hussam, you would like to answer this one. Are you aware of any compensation or of any type of compensation for detainees, for released detainees, for that kind of attacks? Did anyone of the international community has offered the hospitals or the medical staff for any kind of reconciliation, compensations of any type? Over to you.
Well, we haven't heard about such a thing, but let me take us a step back and say, well, we like healthcare providers and all prisoners in general in Syrian detention centers don't have access to healthcare. And again, like when I remember my experience under detention, I can still remember how people were suffering from different types of injuries and different types of complications from the torture, or some of them were shot while being chased to be detained and immediately were sent to prison without getting them any without allowing them to access healthcare. And there was no enough healthcare available for detainees, and people have died because of the lack of medical care. Now, were they offered, those who were released, were they offered, or the families of those who were killed under detention, were they offered any compensations? Was there any process for reconciliation? The answer, at least from what we hear, what we know, what we see, is no.
I think the aim was clearly counter to that. The aim was to eliminate and disable the medical capacity in the human action capacity. My last question here I have maybe for Zahra to answer. So despite the deconfliction mechanism is so clearly internationally coordinated, are we aware of any criminal trial? Not kind of, because on the international levels, there are different levels of accountability, but we are talking about criminal trial for the perpetrators against hospitals, or if there is any type of questioning or accountability towards the breach of the confliction mechanism.
We cannot hear you, Zahra. You're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, so thank you for the question. Unfortunately, to date, even outside of like healthcare attacks, we've seen very limited criminal trials on anything that's taken place in Syria. And to date, I've not seen the issue of attacks on healthcare being brought up at all. And that actually, I know the IIIM, for example, which is an entity that kind of is supposed to be documenting violations of crimes, they are looking at, that when they're trying to document that they are looking at some of the attacks on healthcare facilities. So at least, we're having that in case an opportunity does arise. But that kind of also brings me back to the question you asked Dr. Hussam in terms of accountability in the future, but it shouldn't just be perpetrator focused. It also should be victim centered. And when you ask a lot of the victims of these types of attacks, what kind of accountability do you see? It's not, I want to see the perpetrator caught immediately. Often it's, I need compensation, or we need, a safe environment for us to be able to access healthcare, etc., etc. And this is a really important point, because they're not going to get this from the regime. And this is a really important point for those who question entities like, donors and governments, etc., who ask, what can we do about it if there's no kind of clear accountability mechanism at the courts? There is still a lot to do with the victims, because there's still a lot of accountability that can be done on the ground with the victims. And there's plenty of opportunity for that today, for things to be done with regards to a victim-centered approach, while we wait for opportunities for further accountability with courts and international courts and all this type of thing.
Well, it's really regrettable that nothing has happened yet, but taking that victim-centric approach is hope maybe, and it's maybe a call for more documentation and more work on the international courts. Maybe the trials happened in Germany and is giving us all some hope. I would like to thank you very much for your time. I have a couple of words from Shahshada Affair of the Syrian embassy. He had medical surgery yesterday, that's why he cannot join us today. So some of the words that he would like to say. Thank you very much for your presence on the occasion of humanitarian, the International Day of Humanitarian Action. We would like to thank all humanitarian workers in Syria for their efforts along the 11 years of the Syrian tragedy. We would like to start by thanking the Syrian heroes on the field, the volunteers and the staff working in all sectors. We would like also to thank all countries and UN bodies that supported the humanitarian efforts in Syria. In that context, we would like to pay special tribute to the distinguished role of the state of Qatar for their and its relief organizations for their amazing role. Governments and people of Qatar stood side by side to their brothers and sisters in Syria, and they portrayed the finest model of solidarity and humanity. Whether it's a sizzling summer or freezing winter, we have always seen the volunteers of Qatar Charity and Qatar Red Crescent marching among tents of camps inside Syria or Lebanon or in Zaatari in Jordan. Unfortunately, while we're seeing these hands extended to save lives, there were always demons looking for killing and destruction, and that was so clear during your speech. The world has witnessed with great regret the systematic targeting of civilians, and bombing of schools and hospitals, and attacks and kidnapping of humanitarian workers tortured them with most horrific ways. Targeting of humanitarian workers and facilities is not only a violation of international law, but it's also against human nature. The perpetrators must be held accountable. For that reason, it's shocking for us to see the possibility of normalizing with this criminal regime, despite the amount of evidences of its criminal acts towards Syrian people and the violation of all international norms and laws and human rights conventions. In a word, Assad is a war criminal that does not belong to the international community. It belongs behind the bars of the International Criminal Court. Final words, I would like to thank all the esteemed speakers for their participation, for their time, for their continuous efforts to defend and advocate human rights. I would like also to thank all the attendees for their timing and wish you all the best of luck and hope to see you soon. Thank you very much.